Let's just go straight over to our first speaker, who's going to be part of this series of lightning talks. And that person is the principal researcher at Nesta and project coordinator for NGI Forward, the NGI's Policy and Strategy Office. Please welcome Katja Bego.
Hello all, my name is Katja Bego and I'm a principal researcher at Nesta, the UK's Innovation Foundation. And we're the coordinators of the NGI Forward project, and we're very pleased to co-host this event with you today, together with the City of Amsterdam and the European Commission. So the NGI Forward project is the policy and strategy arm of the Next Generation Internet Initiative, the European Commission's flagship program seeking to build a more democratic, inclusive and resilient future internet. So we're very pleased to later hear during a big keynote speech from Piers O'Donoghue, who is the Director of Future Networks at the European Commission, who will tell us more about the Commission's ambitions for the NGI and digital agenda more broadly. So our role as a project is to help the Commission come up with an ambitious vision for the future internet. So we're actually today releasing a white paper or a working paper with some of those ideas. We help identify the concrete building blocks that we need to bring us closer towards that vision. So both policy interventions and technical solutions. And we'll be discussing a lot of those with you over the next 2 days. And we convene an ecosystem of change across Europe, bringing together policymakers from the city level up, civil society leaders, innovators, to make sure the NGI is not just a top-down initiative, but also a bottom-up one. Now, onto our vision. So for our vision to be grounded in reality, we need to make sure what kind of future we might be operating in. The problems we face on the internet, as we know, are incredibly wide-ranging, complex, and fast-evolving. It cannot possibly be captured in a single 5-minute talk. But as we think about the various layers of the system, though, from the internet's underlying infrastructures all the way up to the kind of interactions they facilitate, there are a couple of dynamics that we keep seeing recurring again and again and again across all these different parts of the system. And this is this idea of more. More concentration, more fragmentation, and above all, just more things. When I talk about more concentration of power, I'm telling you nothing new when I say that on today's internet, power is concentrated in the hands of only very few actors who control what we read, what we see. We're living in a winner-takes-all digital economy, where the tendency tends to be towards ever more accumulation, where a small number of winners keep emerging across layers of the system, leaving the rest of us behind, especially those who are already excluded in the digital divide. As this vicious cycle continues, those who currently dominate, have access to data, for example, are also best able to seize on the next generation of technologies, such as artificial intelligence, to also ensure that they can perpetuate their own position in the next generation of technologies as well. Here you see a picture of a project we commissioned for NGI Forward that I really, really love. This is by Belgian artist Dries de Hoek. So he asked children in Senegal and Belgium to draw the internet. And as you can see, young children today, which is actually quite sad, see the internet just as a series of applications, a series of logos on their phone, walled gardens, rather than the still open internet a lot of us still get to grow up with. So how do we make sure we can let the pendulum swing back the other way? How do we re-decentralize the internet? So to do that, we need to break through a lot of these vicious cycles of accumulation we described. Can we open up the data economy to new data commons models, for example, where we can share our data on our own terms and reduce the need for new services to create their own unaccountable data lakes? A second trend we see is this idea of more fragmentation. COVID-19 has only accelerated fragmentation and breakdown of governance systems that was already a long time in the making. Tech has become one of the main theaters of geopolitical tension, and we see this growing distrust about technologies like 5G, some very famous social media applications as well, and a strong push towards national sovereignty and decoupling and reducing dependencies between countries. There is a real risk we might end up with a fully functional splinter net if we continue on this path. So how do we preserve the open internet? What can Europe do about it? The openness of the internet is one of our greatest goods, and Europe can play an important role in strengthening global governance and prevent breakdown of the internet governance system as a whole. One example of how we might do that is through using Europe's trusted role as a regulator, the so-called Brussels effect, to audit and scrutinize technologies, for example. Which ones can be trusted? And can that help solve this, alleviate some of these tensions? A third example of more is this idea of more of everything, simply just more stuff. More of us than ever before are now connected to the internet. We use on average more devices per person, and we also use those devices in ever more energy intensive ways. It takes a lot more energy, for example, to stream an hour of our favorite TV show than it takes to read an article. So the internet's environmental footprint continues to increase explosively. But this increased volume doesn't just have an environmental footprint, it also has a social one. So information overload and the addictive nature of many of the tech solutions that we rely on is contributing to the erosion of our democracies, and simply just quite hard for our brains to handle. When does more connectivity simply become too much? So how do we stay within planetary as well as cognitive bounds? So we have some ideas here too. So while COVID-19, of course, has shown the great importance of the internet in keeping us connected and going, the digital divide now risks actually leaving more of us behind than ever before, as we're so reliant on the internet. But we must also become more deliberate, though, when we think about connectivity, to focus on good connectivity. Can we use the concept of data minimization, for example, as it's enshrined in the GDPR, to think about what data we actually really need? What do we have to keep? This is not just to preserve privacy, but also to reduce the internet's footprint. We must also think about instilling an ethos of conscious connectivity, where we become more aware of the impact of each additional picture we save, device we purchase, marketing newsletter we send out. Next one. So these are just some ideas, some themes that we explore in our new working paper that we'll be releasing today. You can see it on research.ngi.eu, our project website. And this is really about building that sort of quite cohesive, comprehensive vision for a more democratic, resilient, sustainable, trustworthy, and inclusive future internet. And we really look forward to discussing a lot of the ideas in that paper and much more with you over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Katja. Great presentation. And wow, how worrying that children from other parts of the world, and I'm sure here as well, see the internet as a series of brands, Google, Facebook. So there's clearly a lot of work we need to do to decentralize the internet and make it clear that it is a tool which is completely democratic. Now, Katja's talk will be available as part of her working paper, and that's on the research.ngi.eu section of NGI's website. But the team here will also drop a link directly to her research paper in the chat box. So once again, if you're watching this from Twitter or YouTube, head over to the site, and that's where you can join in the conversation and get direct links to lots of handy information. Before we move on to our next speaker, it's time for a new poll. Okay, so fingers at the ready. I would like you guys to tell me which of the 5 objectives that Katja described do you feel most strongly about? Which of these 5 objectives as to the future of the internet do you feel most strongly about? Is it that the internet becomes more democratic, more resilient, more sustainable, more trustworthy, or more inclusive? Tell us what you think. Should the internet become, is it that the internet becomes more democratic, resilient, sustainable, trustworthy, or inclusive? Which one do you feel the most important is? Okay. While we collate the answers to that poll, I'm going to introduce the next speaker as part of these, who is going to form part of this series of lightning talks. Herself an early internet pioneer and now the founder of the Waag here in Amsterdam, a middle ground organization that is all about empowering people to become active citizens through technology. Her name is Marleen Stikker.
Yes, hello. Thank you for including me in the program. I'm already very inspired by the story of Katja, of course, because that's very much, I'm very much aligned with what she's saying. I wouldn't know how to choose between the 5 objectives myself. I would take them all. I think they have to be integrated. What I want to address is that if we want to fix the internet because it's broken, as I also wrote a book about, the internet is broken, but we can fix it. We also have to understand why it's broken, because if we don't, then we might start to fix on the superficial level, and we don't have the deeper level, the origins of why parts of the internet are at the moment broken, that people don't feel really at ease when they use applications. And I think the core of the problem is that we consider, or have been considering, the internet as a market the last 25, 30 years. And that we say, well, the market can innovate, so they will bring us the best. And well, it's even free. So these are the best products that our citizens can get because they don't have to pay for it. And as Susanna Zuboff already mentioned in her book, Surveillance Capitalism is not even that we are not only the product when it's free, we are also the cadaver, which is sucked out, all the data is sucked out of us, we don't even matter anymore. So it's even worse than being the product. And I'm also very worried about stories also coming from the European Parliament and other political parties to say, well, when people get the right price for their data, then there is a normal transaction, and then we can continue. And then again, I think this is thinking about the internet as a market, as a place for transactions, where even our own being, our life, our relationships are becoming part of a transactional sphere. And it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, when the early beginnings, the internet was much more a public space, a place which was a place where there was no appropriation of the spaces that we were communicating, the technologies that we were using. And very, very soon after 1994, I've been in helping out the public part of the internet since 1993. I think it was part of the neoliberal thinking that everything could be a market, also the water, the energy, transport. The internet came into the moment that it needed our attention as a public space, with public values, as a commons. It was in the same area that everybody believed, even the Social Democrats, that the markets would be the best way to organize our societies. And I think here lies the big important question that we have to ask. Are we prepared to invest in the internet as a public service, as a public space? Which means that all kind of funding that now flows into technology and innovation should have the reason that it should be open technologies and open source and become part of a commons, and cannot be appropriated by not big tech, but also not technology companies that would love to become a tech party, because we now look at only the Googles, Amazons, and Facebooks of this world, where there are many others that would love to do the next step, to be the next one. So even if we talk about Europe as a place that could bring in public values, the GDPR has been mentioned with privacy and sovereignty as at the core of technology, still also Europe believes that the market can do it. And I even hear my own State Secretary Knops say we are going to solve these problems with public-private collaborations with a lot of venture capital and startups. And I believe this, if we don't change the economics within the internet, we're going to end up with the same problem with other parties. Maybe we can break up big tech, but then we have maybe put a lot of other companies in the position which base their business models on extraction of data and so on. The Waag has been involved in next generation internet for some years now. We have been thinking about public values, public spaces. Recently, we made a report for our second chamber, our parliament, called Routekaart Digitale Toekomst, the roadmap for digital future. I will post the URL of there's also an English version on the internet shortly, on the Twitter shortly. Which helps to clarify what we can do, and it makes like it clarifies what's underneath the surface of the applications. A lot of people experience the internet only from the application side, and there's underneath, of course, a lot of things going on. And since technology is not neutral, artificial intelligence is not neutral, data is not neutral, protocols are not neutral, it really is about the discussion, what kind of future, what kind of society do we want? How do we want to structure power? How do we want to structure the financial gain, or can we constitute the internet as a commons again? I think it's possible. That's why I'm quite, I try to be optimistic to say that it is possible, another future is possible. We can fix the internet, but then we have to come up with very, very committed public engagement. And I think so we should not only look into the public-private part, but we should think about society as an innovation platform, have the NGOs and the cultural institutions and citizens being part of the design of the future of the internet. And I hope we can set up field labs for that in the near future, so that we can prototype and show what's already there. I think there's so many things already there. I think it's possible also to have companies that are based on commons and on public values. But we first have to constitute these public values ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marleen. Much appreciated. And I really appreciate Marleen there reacting to what the State Secretary said, pointing out some of the potential risks of funding changes to the internet using money from the private sector, venture capitalists and so on. So much appreciated. Thank you, Marleen. Okay, we're going to move swiftly on to the Chief Executive of Demos Helsinki, a think tank that sets out to build sustainable and fair post-industrial societies. Please welcome Juha Leppänen.
My name is Juha Leppänen, and thank you already for great talks this morning. Very, very happy to be here with you, and greetings from a surprisingly warm Helsinki. For the past 10 years, I've worked to make technology work for the benefit of our societies, of our democracies. First, by co-founding a tech startup fighting against social filter bubbles and the click economy. Now as the Chief Executive at Demos Helsinki. Today, I was asked to talk about a vision for the future internet. My question for today is, what if we recognize digital platforms for what they truly are? And no, I'm not talking about the current tech monopolies challenging our democracies and regulators around the world. I'm talking something much more fundamental. Let me tell you what I mean. During the past decade, we've come to realize that there is a new, incredibly potent business model emerging. A business model that benefits from networking effects and creates value through a highly orchestrated digital environment. As users, we've been attracted by the convenience. As societies, we've been astonished by the promise. Then, as you know, 2016 happened. We got Brexit, and Donald Trump got elected as the President of the United States. And suddenly, we started to talk about platform governance. Terrified with the power of these platform giants, we wanted to control them. During the past 4 years, we've debated what this control means. Whether it means better privacy rights, that has been stated here many times already during this morning, for users and individuals, or enforcing guidelines for individual ownership of data, or even publicly owning the platforms, as Marleen was referring to. I would argue that there are 3 alternative approaches for platform governance emerging, and we're currently living through the first 2. First approach is governance of platforms. This means how governments enforce regulatory regimes or antitrust and platform giants. This approach is dictated by politicians and civil servants. The second approach is governance within platforms. This self-regulatory approach is about platforms trying to establish sufficient measures to ensure that they can tackle most negative impacts themselves. This approach is dictated by the leaders of the current platform giants. One shouldn't underestimate the self-regulatory approach, as we have examples of industries with significant societal power being mainly self-regulated in the past. Journalism is an example of such industry that in many Western societies has maintained its legitimacy by a clear and established self-regulatory framework. The third approach on platform governance is an emerging one: governance through platforms. I would expect that we will start to see public platform partnerships in which the government and the platform start a process of negotiation and experimentation through which a digital platform increasingly starts to operate towards jointly stated goals. The potential is quite significant. Let's take an example of Uber. Public platform partnership could mean, for instance, Uber helping a city to get towards its climate targets. The problem with all these three approaches of platform governance is that we still primarily think of platforms as a business model or a company. The current debate on platforms is based very much on a false dichotomy. You either let the existing platform giants roam free. These giants can at their best be called as proto-platforms, or you start to regulate them and control them. What if we would recognize digital platforms for what they truly are? Platforms are a new way to orchestrate human interactions with far higher resolution, precision, and anticipation than any of the previous paradigms in history. Platforms are also non-territorial by nature and have the potential to transcend nation states. In short, platforms are a novel and powerful mechanism of governance in itself. From this perspective, when talking about a vision for the future of internet, we need to do three things. Firstly, we need to recognize platforms, a novel and powerful way to orchestrate human interactions, a societal innovation in the same line as cities were back 10,000 years ago, then driven also by a new technology, agriculture. Cities enable humanity to move forward as platforms can. Secondly, we need to initiate a process of societal imagination, research, and debate to recognize what would be the best way to design an institutional setup for platforms. Whether platforms should be owned collectively or not at all. How and by whom we set rules for behavior on a platform. We need an institutional setup that starts to create trust in an analog on how trust towards the nation states was created by a long negotiation of a social contract that happened through thinking and experimentation in the past 300 years. Instead of a political economy of platforms, we need political philosophy of platforms. Thirdly, and most importantly, we need to learn to dream big. In a world in which industrial era global governance regimes are breaking down, we've managed to come up with a new way of governing interactions of individuals and communities. Only this way we can escape the current tragedy of platforms and imagine a utopia in which humanity is able to collaborate collectively more than in the past. For this, we need an internet that is whole, not the one that is fragmented in its roots. To sum it up, what if by 2030, we think back of the tech giants of the 2010s as mere proto-platforms that illustrated the potential of new technology, but were far from realizing the potential for our societies? What if by 2030, instead of having lost the previous global governance regimes, we're building a new one that is driven by people and communities, and which we set rules and incentives democratically, a new mode of governance for the 21st century? What if in 2030 we have won back our belief for the utopia that is internet? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juha. I really love the sound of the people taking back the power and setting the rules for all of those internet platforms. I love that idea. Thank you very much. Right, we're going to move on and we're going to hear from the spokesperson from the Foundation for Public Code, which is an organization that is passionate about public purpose software and policy that is open and collaborative. Please welcome Ben Cerveny.
For inviting me to speak here. This has been feel like we're forming sort of a braided narrative emergently, talking about a lot of these issues simultaneously. Where we come from is a perspective that applications will move from being something we consider technology to moving something we consider infrastructure. Many, humans invent things all the time, and for the first 30 years they call them technology, and then once they work, they call them infrastructure. And at this sort of threshold, a totally different set of actors become responsible for the provision of these services in an inclusive way. And right now we're sort of looking at the movement of network services in this exact kind of path that Juha just described. And in this moment, we're seeing that a lot of public administrations, particularly municipalities where citizens and residents come into contact with network services offered in the public sector, have already taken it upon themselves to they've realized that their relationship with many of these cloud service providers has been one of extractive economics and lock-in. And so they've taken it upon themselves to move towards agency and sovereignty in the way that they operate in relationships with their residents. However, they have trouble because open source in and of itself is a project that requires a community of practice. And often in the public sector at the moment, when people embrace open source solutions, they find themselves operating in a vacuum because they have taken it upon themselves to break away from the sort of narrative, the dominant narrative of cloud provided commercial services, and start to look at how they can design software in relation to their own populations. And this sort of goes to an issue that I find really interesting about software, which is that software has terroir, which is that it is produced in a very specific cultural context. And this is something we've ignored so far in the way that we treat sort of the international network applications, in that you might talk about Italian food or French cinema, but somehow software is just software. But often this software comes from a culture in which it doesn't operate as a cloud service, and therefore it doesn't fulfill the needs that are generated in a local context, much less with the citizens, but also in the context of policy. And that's one of the things that the Foundation for Public Code is concentrating on, is the idea that software and policy are converging in a digitally transformed public sector. You'll find now that more and more often, not just in these artificial intelligence and machine learning context that we're talking about, but in every context that you'll find software operating in the public sector is operating as an extension of policy. And therefore, these two code bases, policy being a code base and software being a code base, are actually convergent. And so we need to really concentrate on making sure that as we design applications for the offering of public infrastructure, public digital infrastructure, we also need to recognize that they need to be a projection of policy, and there needs to be a feedback loop between the literacy and transparency of the policy and the literacy and the transparency of the applications that represent them. But the idea is that many public institutions have similar concerns, similar structural needs around software in relation to their citizens and their internal operation. And so the Foundation for Public Code is working very much along the lines of some of the sort of trajectories that we've just heard the other speakers talk about, in taking tools that municipalities, regional governments, national governments, supranational entities have built to operate services like libraries or waste management systems, parking services systems, case management systems around voting in city councils. And these are shared needs. And so we can build a common set of tools that are open and adaptive and oriented towards a microservices architecture that can be deployed on compute backplanes that might be available in various different national contexts. You could imagine a city that needs to run a library management system reaching into a tool set that has been developed by a collaboration across a set of municipalities or regional governments, and being able to, because it's open, reach into it and modify it for the specific context in which it's deployed. And so the idea here is that this, sort of market model that Marleen was referencing, that we have seen so far in the way that large-scale applications have been deployed on the internet, could find itself an alternative, in the sense that these collaboratively developed public applications could actually form a tool set that could operate both on the back end of urban services, but also as a library of tools that people, residents and citizens themselves might use. For instance, some applications include things like Bouwgroep, which is a mechanism for building high-density residential buildings together, in which one might launch a sort of instance of a small-scale social network similar to Slack, that would have a variety of services aligned around finding a financial vehicle that a group of people could invest in together, buy a piece of property and collaborate with architects. Or, for instance, Decidim, which is based out of Barcelona, which is a collaborative tool for decision-making, usually around participatory budgeting, that's been used in a process that they've led around pedestrianizing intersections, and then allowing the residents nearby to collaboratively build the new parks or other facilities in these spaces together through a decision-making process that's hosted online. And these types of experiences, these use cases that exist outside of market conditions, are kind of the new internet that's promised by this kind of cloud, the marriage of something like cloud computing and public applications that are containerized and ready to be shared by public administrations and other actors. The idea is that this is the back end to an incredibly richly functional set of tools that we consider infrastructure, like plumbing and roads and these types of things. We take them for granted, and we now have come to this sort of threshold where we can begin to understand that there will be an inclusive, accessible, transparent, adaptive, sustainable set of tools that are produced through a mechanism of public production, in the same way that we have these other infrastructural resources produced. And we can all begin to understand that this is, standing on the shoulders of giants. We can continue to build and expand and enrich and collaborate within the context of these applications over the coming years, and begin to build this a new type of environment for us to live in. I mean, the spatial computing, AR, a lot of these applications are moving our way, and we sort of have to understand that we're moving out of the era in which the internet is delivered to us through objects that we hold, and instead will permeate the environment. And in this context, the idea of the public is also moving into the context of physical space and the overlay of digital space as well. And so this, as the market actors move into this idea of spatial computing, we really need to be alert to this concept that that public applications, that the idea of public expands upward into the software stack and into the stack of collaborative network functionalities. Thank you very much.